Welcome, everybody. I am Kathy Oehler. You're here in I Hate to Write, Strategies for Students at the Secondary Level, right? Is that what everybody is expecting? Later on during this conference, we'll be talking about strategies that are more for kids at the elementary level, and then some other programs tomorrow. Some sensory strategies for elementary and then secondary, and then technology for reluctant writers. So you have the possibility of hearing us 5 times at this focus on inclusion.
But please come, please come.
Yeah. All right. As I said, I'm Kathy Oehler. For the last several years, I've worked as an autism consultant for Pike Township Schools, which is on the northwest corner of Indianapolis. I'm also a speech-language pathologist.
I'm Cheryl Boucher, and I'm an occupational therapist, and for many years I have worked in Wayne Township Schools here in Indianapolis. I also did some evening work in a little sensory integration type of center, and a lot of kiddos with obviously OT and autism related issues, and so I really enjoyed that as well, but tried to do it while I was doing school too, and it was a bit much after a few years, but a lot of fun. I always have to also share that I have a nephew named Casey Davis, who is now graduated with a certificate of completion in Livonia, Michigan. And Casey has taught me so much because he happens to have autism. And so it's really exciting that I know you have somebody special in your life probably that you know beyond our students that we work with. And it really kind of drives me, I'm sure it does you. And it was so meaningful this morning to listen to our speaker. It was just outstanding. I attended a workshop years ago that was called People Not Packages. And it really, really makes you think and stop and understand better. So it's really, really great. So Casey's my driving force.
Yeah, why don't you find out who else here?
Yeah. So we always like to try to find out who our demographics are. And it's hard when we talk about what autism looks like and related disorders to cover everything. And then when we look at different age groups and all kinds of differences and great strengths, but who we're speaking to. So how many are teachers? Awesome. How many are special education teachers? Wonderful. How many teach everything from inclusion to as I had someone say they were with certificate of completion students, kind of a diversity.
Diploma bound and certificate.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody teach life skills? Okay. Great. Do we have any other OTs here? No. Okay.
Any other SLPs?
SLPs. Any counselors? Psychologists?
Administrators?
Welcome. Parents? Awesome. Welcome. Did I miss anybody? There's so many great fields. Okay.
How many of you work or have worked with an individual who hates to write? Trick question. You wouldn't have chosen this session if that weren't the case. All right.
No.
Well, today we're going to talk about writing. We're going to talk about the writing process, not just the process of making pretty letters, although we are going to spend some time on legibility. But we're going to talk about that process of writing, the act of getting information from here in a kid's brain onto paper, something that we can see, assess, grade, whether it's through pencil paper or whether it's through keyboarding. So many of our students struggle with this process, especially our students with executive function learning differences. Okay, I'm going to define that in just a minute. The issue of writing is at the core of so many of our school concerns. I can't tell you how often I have sat at a high school case conference as an autism consultant, and someone around the table has said, you know, this student has good intelligence, they have good ideas, but I'm afraid that they're not going to graduate because they just don't do their work. Okay, I learned as the autism consultant to ask, what does that mean? And the English teacher will say, you know, we did Romeo and Juliet, and the student took a role, read the book, knew the material, and never wrote the book report. So the student got a 0. And the chemistry teacher, the science teacher will say, you know, this kid is one of my best lab students, loves doing the labs, actually helps the other kids, but he never ever writes up his lab report. So he gets an F on each one of the labs. Similar story through the social studies teacher. You know, our whole grade for this unit was writing the research paper, and I saw him do his research. I know he knew his topic, and he never wrote up the research paper, so we got a 0. Okay, what's the common denominator in all of those? Writing. If a student can't or won't write, we can't assess or judge or grade exactly what he knows and how close he's gotten to our academic standards that we're required to meet. So, why do so many of our students with executive function learning differences struggle with the writing process? I want to show you executive function. I told you I would tell you a definition of that. I'm going to give you the shortest, down and dirty definition that I could ever give. Executive function essentially is how the brain takes in information, organizes it and remembers it, and does something with it. There's no blood test for executive function disorder, so it gets a whole lot of labels. Some official, some unofficial. These are a few of the ones that kids with executive function learning differences get labeled with. But the bottom line is that the label doesn't make any difference. What does make a difference is how these learning differences affect the way kids take in information, learn it, remember it, and can do something with it. Now, the writing process. Why is that so hard for so many of our kids with these executive function learning differences? Let's look at some of the skills that are required for writing. Look at this. There isn't going to be anything on there that's a surprise for you. In order to write, the student has to have language. He has to know the words. He has to have organization. He has to be able to organize letters into words, words into sentences, sentences into paragraphs. He has to have those skills. There's probably nothing on there that would be a surprise except for maybe the word proprioception, and we're going to talk quite a bit about that in just a little bit. So hold off on that. So a student needs these skills in order to do functional writing. Well, let's look at some of the skills that are required that are hard for students with executive function and are required for writing.
Sound familiar? And so I think this is a really important slide because it really explains that so often I don't think everyone realizes the multi-layers that are involved in being a good writer, a good written communicator. And if some of these pieces are missing, I'm not going to be a very good writer. And so I've got to be able to get the utmost from my students. And I know those moments when you go, oh my gosh, he had awesome ideas, but he just couldn't get it out on paper. I know he's got it in there, but it's stuck and we can't seem to get it out. I know his handwriting is so very poor, and yet he can't type yet. So there's so many pieces there that are happening. And some of our kids, we know, they have skills in certain areas, but they can't seem to do it all at the very same time. So what we can do to help with them? Kathy and I are kind of nerdy, and we like to do a lot of exploring on research and look at what's out there. Because I feel like every time I understand better what is out there and what is research-based, I'm going to have so much more sense in my brain to know how I can help students. I can take that research and then apply it meaningfully to the kids that I see every day. And so when we looked at the research, and it comes out, I mean, the amount of research is abundant now. You can't keep up with it, but we pulled a few. And one area that we like to talk about is a little bit when we think about from the very get-go, when our kids are first learning how to write and be able to do in our preschools and elementary, they're supposed to be doing that imitation, that monkey see, monkey do. But what they found in the studies for individuals on the spectrum is that those parietal area of the brain, where those monkey see, monkey do neurons are located, there's a difference there. They're not functioning the same. And so when our other young kids are picking up pretty quick how to imitate and form and make letters, our kids can't do that monkey see, monkey do. I'm going to make it like this, and you imitate. We see it in their motor actions. We see it when they're trying to do sports and activities and PE frequently. They're definitely, many of them are that out of sync child. And so from the get-go, how am I supposed to be able to print if I'm not even able to do the beginning of letter formation to begin with? So when we also looked at the difference between, we practiced those letters, you were able to make them yesterday, we practice. Why can't you do it today? You're not remembering. Well, we know there aren't as many neural connections in the cortex as we take in that new information, and the connections between where we retain it and draw from it for long-term memory in the cerebellum area. So again, right away, it's harder for me. You're moving so fast. And we know that printing and everything is integrated into our learning now. It's not even as an isolated approach to learning letter formation. And meanwhile, we have other kids who are going on and saying, I don't care how you make the letters, we just want you to get on paper and tell us your creative idea and try to sound out words. Our kids are just trying to remember how to make a W. Another interesting study was looking at those sensory motor regions of the brain. And again, that connection between the cortex and the cerebellar area, they found that there was so much more overabundance of neural connections for sensory motor, and yet an under-responsive amount of connections for the problem-solving and learning and memory areas of the brain. So once again, it's not telling you anything you don't already know. You know you're here because our kids are struggling with writing, but it helps to understand it more because sometimes things look like a behavior, and it looks like they're just, I know they can try. I'll have a teacher come up and show me, look at the spelling words he did. I can see when he takes his time how neat it looks. Well, it was one word at a time he wrote. It was very rote. And that's all he had to focus on. So I've got kids who they make top to bottom letters. I'm not too bad on that. They can make a letter in isolation, but you start doing all these layers we're showing you, and the quality of everything starts to diminish. And what they want to do is to get it over with as quick as possible. Have you had a student who wants to stop writing as little as they can? Right? Okay.
Let's look at that writing skill of organization. As I mentioned earlier, in order to write, kids have to organize letters into words, words into sentences, sentences into paragraphs. Think of your students. This was another revealing study, neurological study. They found that individuals with autism, this one looked at autism, actually have more white matter than those of us who are neurotypically developing, but far fewer neural connections from one part of the brain to another, thus less neural integration and organization. It's not that they're not trying to be organized, their brains are just wired differently. And then the last study I want to talk about, there are so many now. I encourage you to get online and read some of these studies. It's fascinating. Every day there's a new one that comes out. This one looked at students with Asperger's syndrome. Has anybody ever worked with somebody that has a label of Asperger's syndrome? Yeah, okay. The criteria has changed a little bit, but essentially Asperger's is generally considered to be the top end of the autism spectrum, essentially normal intelligence, but still characteristics of the autism spectrum. There's a lot more than that, but for now, let's stick with that. And the mystery for many of us who have worked with kids with Asperger's is that they often have incredible vocabularies, wonderful vocabularies, but the most amazing difficulty following directions, simple directions. What's that all about? So this neurological study looked at the two big language hubs in the brain. The whole brain's involved in language, but there are two, what I call the big dogs. There's Broca's area and there's Wernicke's area. And they found out that with people who had a diagnosis of Asperger's, one of those areas fired much, much faster than it did in those of us who were neurotypically developing. And the other language hub fired much, much slower, which resulted in poor language integration, what we in school would call poor language processing, difficulty following directions. Who knew? Again, it's not that the kids are not as intelligent, it's not that they're not giving as much effort, their brains are just wired differently. So, big deal, what do? I'm a classroom teacher, I have to meet all these standards, I don't have time to mess with writing. As an autism consultant, I heard that all the time. And as somebody who felt that writing was at the core of a lot of our behavior and academic achievement issues, it made me crazy. Little personal note there. So, I have some really good responses to you. If someone says that to you now, I don't have time to teach writing. First, sorry, that was my teacher mode. First, sorry, you got me in one of my hot spots here. After the middle of second grade, writing is the way we expect students to show us anything they know academically, especially at high school. Think about this. Students show us what they know through written assignments, through tests, through quizzes, through high-stakes testing, through reports. It all involves writing. If they can't or won't write, we can't measure what they know. Second, in Indiana, okay, we are not in the Common Core standards. We operate over our Indiana academic standards, which have a writing component in every tower as you know that, from kindergarten up through beyond grade 12. It's just amazing. So if a kid can't or won't write, they're not meeting our academic standards. And then the third, look at this particular one right here. There was a study that came out in 2010, so it's not even a brand new study, that talked about the incredible link between the physical act of writing and literacy, comprehension. We're not talking about the difference between cursive and manuscript. That is not part of this. This is just the physical act of writing. Read through this. Writing about material that's been read increases the overall comprehension. Just writing. You can take a picture of this slide if you want to. Teaching students how to write increases. Look at this. All these things that we find as teachers. Reading comprehension, fluency, and word reading. And increasing the amount of student writing. Just the quantity increases reading comprehension. Go figure. Writing is a big deal. So, for the rest of today's presentation, Cheryl and I are going to talk about strategies that you as teachers can try with your students, with your reluctant writers. We're going to encourage you to look at the issue of writing through 4 lenses: sensory, motor, language, and organization. When you are trying to help a student, you really need to look at all 4 of those areas to really help a student pull out their most effective skill at meeting these writing tasks.
When Kathy and I wrote our book, we were trying to figure out what kind of layout, what was going to be most meaningful for those who might want to be interested in reading the book and to have it be most helpful. So what we did was we took quotes from teachers. So in the red, you'll see up at the top, or rather, the red is the title of the problem area, but the quote in blue is from actual teachers saying, these are the things, these are the struggles that we're having with our students. How can we have some help? And so the first quote was, when I give him a writing assignment, he just sits there. Even when it's an easy task, well within his ability, why does he just freeze up and does nothing? In other words, I've done lots of great instruction. I've tried to chunk it down. I'm really trying to work maybe even on a high interest area, and we're still kind of just sitting there. So keep in mind those 4 lenses Kathy just mentioned. We've got to look at sensory, we've got to look at motor, we've got to look at language, and we've got to look at organization. And if you miss a filter, a lens, you aren't going to get the best from your kiddos. So we know that getting started, that they just couldn't get started, that there's a big link between our vestibular system, which we'll talk about in a little bit in more detail. That vestibular system is our equilibrium and balance. It's the fluid in my inner ear. It's activated with the starting and stopping of movement. Well, the really wonderful piece is that there's a great connection between that vestibular system, that movement, with my language center. And so what happens when we get up and we get moving? My thoughts come, spontaneous language comes, more ideas for writing come. And so you'll hear more and more about this as we go along, but it's a very, very wonderful little team of sorts. So what we can do to help to wake up a student is to look at, and I kept some slides from my elementary session to go towards my older kids session because we have a diversity of kids, we have diversity of teachers, and when we look at some of our kiddos, we do have teaching in our life skills classrooms as well. So a couple strategies I use for my younger kids, I would use for some of my older kids developmentally if it was appropriate. And also looking at your students, their sensory systems and where they are in being touched or not touched. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So I want to provide a daily job for my kids. And I will say I am always going to start with universal design. You will hear us over and over again is what can I do for the entire class? Not my 1 chosen or 2 or 3 chosen students. We're going to get everybody up and moving. But if I have that kiddo who still needs that little extra boost, he just can't seem to still get it going, and he's over here kind of stuck, he didn't pick up the pencil, he didn't start on the keyboard, then I may have to have him pre-programmed that he has a visual, he has something that spurs him on, that he's the one that helps to pass out the papers. He knows he has a pacing corner to go to now in the back of the room. He's someone who's going to be up and moving and passing out the books that are related to the writing. Whatever it is that I've got him actively, physically engaged. If it's taking a message down to the other end of the high school and come back as fast as you can, I might ask that student to give me some jumping jacks or wall push-ups out in the hall. But better even, I'm going to go back into the classroom and say, what can we do for everybody? When we talk about being stuck, and I couldn't move on and getting started, we think about being stuck in inertia. And scientifically speaking, it's just sort of saying that I have these thoughts, these mental process going on, and I've got that going. I listened, I heard what you said, but I can't make that connection, that switch to physically a motor output happening after you were speaking. So I've had students where I've seen where I'm wondering, you don't seem lost in your own world. You aren't really, really distracted right now, but you're still sitting there. Why are we still sitting? And think about the processing speed for many of our students. And again, this process of possibly being stuck in inertia. So for some of my kids that would be younger and or developmentally appropriate, I might do a hand over hand. I might give them a prompt. It might just be a firm hand on their elbow and just enough to break that inertia. And so that when I give that firm touch, and I say firm, not light. Light is fight, fright, scary stuff. That puts me on a whole different message. But if I give firm touch and I know this student is not tactfully defensive, then I might be able to just barely make pencil to paper, and that might be enough, and I'm going to move away. They're going now. It might be making the first letter to start their name. It might be just enough. I had a student that I literally just went up and put his helping hand, his non-dominant hand, on the paper to stabilize it. And as soon as I did that, he jump-started. That's all it took. So this is a prompt, but just a way of thinking about, for some students, it could be very helpful.
If you have a student who has trouble getting started on his or her work, it looks like behavior, doesn't it? Looks like non-compliance if they won't get started on their work. It may be a challenge in language. I had a student named Elizabeth. I tell this every time I present. This was one of the most interesting students I was an autism consultant, so all of my stories have to do with people who are on the spectrum. But these stories don't refer to just students on the spectrum. I hope you take some of these strategies and look at your other students who are reluctant writers and think, oh, that might work for that student too. Anyway, Elizabeth was on the spectrum. She was the smartest student I've ever had. She's probably the smartest person I've ever met, honestly. She wanted to cure cancer. That's her life skill. I've lost track of her. She'd be out of high school. She's probably out of college now. I wouldn't be surprised if she's working in a research lab someday, and maybe we'll see her name on great cancer research. But anyway, she was actually in danger of not graduating from high school because she couldn't get started on her work. This that I'm showing right here was a breakthrough strategy for us with Elizabeth. What we realized was that Elizabeth had so many flights of excitement in knowledge when she'd learned something that she couldn't make choices. She couldn't make choices when it was time to write or answer questions. So we developed a scaffold like this. This was one of the examples. And just to flesh out how this was done, this was for her advanced science something class. I don't remember what. They had read a unit on scientists who had changed the entire world of scientific thought. And she had loved this chapter. It fed right into her intense interest. The final assignment was to write about a scientist who had changed scientific thought. Something like that. Someone who had made a significant impact on scientific thought. So I wrote down 4 of the top scientists in that unit. And then I sat down with Elizabeth. Cheryl, will you be my Elizabeth?
Of course I will.
Okay. Elizabeth. Who's that?
Galileo.
Who's that?
Da Vinci.
Who's that?
Can't even talk. Da Vinci.
Who's that?
Einstein.
Who's that?
Newton.
Which one do you think is most important?
I really think Einstein.
Einstein. I, the teacher, wrote the word Einstein down here, and then I, the teacher, read, Einstein made a very significant impact on scientific thought. Do you agree?
Yes.
Oh, good. Who did you think was most important again?
Einstein.
I, the teacher, again, wrote it down. The teacher's doing the writing here. Elizabeth hates to write. I don't want her energy to be put into this scaffold. I want her brain to be working, but I don't care what she writes on here. I'm going to write it. Okay, Einstein changed the way people thought about...
The theory of relativity.
You're so good, Cheryl. I wrote that down there. Okay, I did this paper with Elizabeth all the way to the end. Look at the bottom instruction. Write at least 5 paragraphs about this scientist on a separate sheet of paper. Use these sentences for your first paragraph. Look what we have. We have an introductory paragraph. Elizabeth had made a choice on what she was going to write. Her introductory paragraph was already done. She was off to the races. Now, on any of the strategies that Cheryl and I are going to talk about today, We encourage you, if you find a strategy that works, don't just use it once. The point is not to help that student get a good grade on this assignment. The point is to help that student internalize a strategy and be able to take it with them in other settings, in college. I hope Elizabeth is using this ability to make choices in the workplace in some research lab now. Any technical paper, she'd have to do that, be able to choose among choices and write on that one. It's really important. After we found that this was a breakthrough with her, we gathered her whole educational team. She was at the high school, I think she was a sophomore, and had all of the teachers figure out a way they could do this in their subject. And they did, God bless them. They did, and it was a breakthrough. We did it that whole year, and the next year, she was pretty much able to do it herself. So it's a wonderful strategy for students who can't get started on their work. It won't work for all kids, but it will definitely work for some. All right, another thing that you can do, if you have a student who has trouble getting started with their work, it could be because they have trouble with organization. Has anybody used the Solo Literacy Suite? Does that sound familiar to anybody? Okay, good. It has 4 parts, and you may have used one of the parts. The parts are Co-Writer, Read Out Loud, Write Out Loud, and Draft Builder. Any of those ring a bell? Has anybody used any of those parts? I figured you have. Okay. Essentially, Co-Writer is a word prediction system like we have on our iPhones. So it's really good for terrible spellers, kids who have trouble spelling. Read Out Loud will read any electronic text out loud. So if you have electronic textbooks or internet or something like that, the kids can highlight it and the computer will read it to them. Write Out Loud will read their writing out loud so they can listen to see if what they wrote made any sense. And then Draft Builder looks like this one. It's the hardest of the 4, but it's essentially an organizational system that operates on kind of an outline basis, but it has word and idea banks built into it, so students can get more information of a chosen topic through the program. These are expensive. They're available both on iPad and freestanding, and they're not something that you'd suggest to a parent to go out and buy. It's expensive, but you might talk to your school district. Often a district will buy it and push it out. In both of our districts, they're on every single computer in the district. So 1,000, 2,000 computers. We're both in big districts. So take a look at it online and see if it's something that might be of value to your students.
Okay, so our next area of concern was the teacher said that he, when it's time to write, and we say he, there are females too, we all know, but many of our guys, he won't even try. It's almost like a shutdown. He won't even give any effort whatsoever. And so what's happening and how can we help him? What's going on? Remember the 4 lenses: language, organization, motor, and sensory. All of our senses are involved in everything that we do. But when we're talking about writing specifically, our sense of vestibular, our proprioceptive sense, and our sense of touch are really, really powerful. And as you talk to any occupational therapist and physical therapist, they will give you lots and lots of information on that. We're going to do a little short activity and then just a little bit of Sensory 100 class, because when you understand sensory, then you're going to think of more strategies that you can use for your students beyond today. Okay. I like this slide. I like to put things near my teachers' copy machine area so they can just take a look at it. If you'd like a copy of it, email me and I will send it to you. But it shows the pyramid way up at the very top. And so that's whatever your best of the best at the top that you want for your student, that's where you're headed. If it's academic learning, being social, being the best athlete, whatever it is, but for the sake of academic learning and looking at what I have to do to get to that top of the pyramid. And so the very foundation is our central nervous system and looking at our sensory systems. And we look at biologically of just our kids getting enough sleep, enough rest, hydration, the foods that they need, the medications, whether they need or do not need, or the side effects of the medications they may be on. And we look at all these sensory systems. All of the sensory systems have an impact on my brain and body working together, on my bilateral integration, meaning one hand's dominant and one is recessive, on my eyes and hands coordinating, on my reflexes that are old reflexes being inhibited and higher reflexes maturing, my core strength, my postural development, all the way up into eye-hand coordination, postural adjustment, precise control of eye movements, which then has an effect on language and visual spatial relationships, into my attention, focus, behavior, self-care, all the way up to the top. It's a lot, right? And so when we talk about here, why you need to integrate it in a functional way in your classroom and be creative, and we're going to give you more ideas, that this is going to be vital to get to that academic learning. Because you've all got kids, you think that they're just tired and they're lazy and they're unmotivated. And perhaps it is because they are very poor sensory processors. They will say, those individuals with autism as adults will say that my sensory issues were more impacting than any other part of my autism was. And that by virtue of that, that they struggle every day with just being able to tolerate being in the environments that we are all pretty much used to. We all have our moments, right? Okay, so we're going to do a very short activity. It'll just take about a minute. But we want you to experience what it might feel like. So the activity is that you're going to write 2 sentences, and let's make it really fresh, something that you had some thoughts about during the movies this morning. 2 nice, full, big, creative, wonderful sentences about what you were thinking after viewing the movies this morning. And the only little tweak is that you have to do it with your non-dominant hand. Okay, so if you're a righty, you should be holding it in your left hand. If you're left-handed, hold it in your right. You may write in cursive if you choose, however. Okay, we'll give you a minute to do that. Okay, and 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I had to laugh. She's up here going, "Stop talking." And we always do, because have you ever seen the teacher who, you try to whisper sometimes to come in to talk to someone, but ends up saying, "Oh, they're fine, they know what they're supposed to be doing." But all they can hear is the whispering and the talking, and you know what happens then.
And
right?
did you like that encouraging talking that I was doing?
No. And we know many of our friends, they just got a thought. They just got something in their working memory long enough to hold on to it, to get it out, and then they lost it, or someone interrupted them. So can you share with us, first, at your table, talk for a minute about how that felt. Just talk for a second and together. I was going to jump ahead. This is always better to. Well, that what? Yeah.
Did your hand hurt afterwards?
Yeah. Well, and we have some kids who never developed hand dominance. So, exactly. Exactly. It happens a lot.
I know. But it probably makes his little hand hurt.
Okay, and 3, 2, and 1. All right. Would someone like to share their thoughts? It can carry over into, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll see the kiddo. I mean, the example I was saying that for some of our students, and not all, many kids have hand dominance, but some kiddos that just don't even develop strong hand dominance. One's, dominant, one's recessive. You'll see, or that whole bilateral integration piece, and one hand is one finger hitting every letter while they're trying to type, and the processing is still slower, and it's more frustrating. But this evaluation for you to do the activity is the idea that what a tool felt like in your hand. At some point, kids have to still pick up, circle and bubbles. I know we're going to electronic testing now more and more. But that idea of signing a signature, of being able to express myself on paper, because everything hasn't been, and I'm not here to say that everything has to be electronic, but certainly glad that for many of our kids we're heading that direction. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Well, and how that motor difficulty, as this gal said down here, how struggling with the motor difficulty, whether it's this or this, is even harder to maintain your language skills. I mean, she said she takes pride in her language skills, but even her language skills diminished when she was struggling with the motor task.
And the beauty of technology is we don't get the tight grip. My fingers don't hurt the same way. All those pieces of other mechanics and motor-wise that we get with pencil paper. However, you still have a kiddo, and remember, executive functioning is hanging on to my working memory area of executive functioning, hanging on to some kind of information long enough to get it out. And now I'm still looking for where a darn letter is on a keyboard if I haven't had appropriate keyboarding skills. And I had to be remembering how to spell the word in the other layers that we've been talking about too. So yeah, it's just multifaceted. So it's an easy little thing to do at a staff meeting. It just gives you a little bit different feel of what it might, someone with motor experiencing problems is having every day. And it might be with doing something that is hands-on mechanical, that they're having the same kind of issues. But for the issues of today, we're talking about writing. Okay. So when we think about the three little quick slides that we're going to do on sensory, think about our sense of touch as one of the first to develop in the womb. And when we think about our sense of touch, we're looking at really calming and organizing to my nervous system, and that's deep pressure touch. And so that's the kind of touch that when you swaddle a baby and you wrap them close, they typically stop crying because you have given them deep pressure touch to their nervous system. And that in turn is going to calm them. And that travels through the parasympathetic nervous system. I want them on parasympathetic. When I'm on sympathetic, I'm on fight and flight. And many of our kids are living their lives in fight and flight. The amygdala area of the brain that is that relay station that decides what gets learned and what doesn't go into long-term memory and what is really going to make a difference. It doesn't like stress. It doesn't like anxiety. It gets very upset and puts on the, where nobody's going anywhere. You're not going to learn. So we know that the amygdala likes music and movement and laughter and the increase of dopamine. So we're going to go along and talk about some more strategies related to that. But keep that in mind, that deep pressure touch, like giving somebody a big hug, that kind of feeling is very calming, typically to the nervous system. I'm not telling you to go up and hug everybody, but I'm trying to say that as a strategy, I'm going to look for a giant big beanbag chair that I might put that student in who has some of these kinds of issues, that they get a calming around their body when they're sitting in the beanbag chair. That's a deep pressure touch. That I can teach students other ways that they can get their own deep pressure touch in. And you'll see it by some of our kids who wear the really heavy weighted hoodies. You see the kid who doesn't want to take his coat off when he gets into school. It feels good to his body. He's giving himself his swaddling, and he's doing it the best way he can. So look before we tap someone on the shoulder, which is light touch, and tell someone to take the hoodie down or take the coat off, to at least have a little conversation about it and consider that this might be a possibility. But our tactile system is really powerful. Our proprioceptive system is where is my body in space? Where am I in relation to my limbs and my torso, and where am I in relation to objects and other people? And we've all been with those individuals who do not respect others' personal space, and they're always way too close socially, having conversations. They may be leaning into someone else working at a table or at desks, and not realizing that they have truly invaded someone else's space. But my sense of proprioception is really powerful because it's fired off when I do push and pull and lift and carry. It's fired off via my ligaments, tendons, muscle connecting to bone. And all of this push and pull and stretch activity that's going on is firing off those proprioceptors. But what's more important is it also fires off wonderful chemicals that tells me I feel good inside, I'm calm, I'm organized, I'm awake. So every time an OT is around who's saying, are you doing some heavy muscle activity? Are you doing some big muscle, big work activity? That's why they're asking you to do those things. We want to fire off that proprioceptive system, give him more awareness where his body is in space. It helps with so many things. My postural adjustment, my ability, my muscle tone. Think about that core strength, the kiddo who can't even hardly hold themselves up against gravity. Their head is always on their desk. Maybe they're tired, maybe they didn't get to sleep enough, they're a teenager. But think about it, could be a kiddo, particularly if there's some other autism or related disorder going on. But these are just some of the things to be aware of. Signs of poor proprioception are these areas of looking at someone who is a little bit more stiff, a little bit more uncoordinated, a little clumsy. They may be toe walkers. When I toe walk, I get a lot of proprioceptive input. I'm kind of jarring all those joints I've been telling you about. So I get that bouncy feeling going, and it fires off that feeling that feels really good to my proprioceptive system. They may be the kiddo who falls out of their chair. They're a little bit less coordinated than the rest of the group. Breaking pencils, difficulty going up and down the stairs, those types of gross motor areas you'll see as well. When I look at my vestibular system, remember we talked about was activated with movement, the fluid in the inner ear, the stopping and starting. It's a really powerful system, and we don't think about it because it usually works pretty good. But it is my equilibrium, my balance, what's upside down, what's right side up. It makes both sides of my body work together, hold my head up against gravity. Doesn't sound like a very hard thing to do, does it? But if I have a poor functioning vestibular system, it's hard, it's difficult. So I have to hold my head up against gravity and then get my eyes and hands to work together as well on text, on writing, and so forth too. There's again the strong relationship between the auditory and the language center, or the vestibular and language center. Okay, so that's just looking at, and the reason I want you to realize that vestibular, that movement, my proprioceptive of where my body is in space, and that sense of touch, that deep pressure touch, when I put those all together in some format, functionally in a school system, I'm going to be helping that bottom of that pyramid to get to the top. And so I've got to look at activities throughout the day that provide big muscle activity, structured movement, and that sense of calming and security of that swaddling. And that sounds kind of silly for some, but if you think about it and you can just hang on to it for a moment, you'll see where we're going with it, and it's so functional. So going back to some of our kids that are higher need, I'm going to start with a big muscle movement for them. I want to make sure that maybe in the high school, I'm giving them the job of helping to clear off the tables at the end of the cafeteria time, wiping off tables, pushing in chairs. Maybe they have a job in the library. Maybe they're helping support the custodian. There's a ton of jobs throughout school. I'd love to say I'm going to have them do their job prior to joining everyone for writing or whatever academic is the main one that they're struggling with. And then I can be able to go back and say I'm going to have the whole class participate in some kind of big muscle exercises and activities throughout the day. Looking at what kind of tool, pen the kids like, or technology they like. Looking whether it's a tablet or it's a Chromebook or it's a laptop, whatever is available in your schools. But also letting them choose, if it's a pencil paper, what kind of tool feels the best in their hand. We all have our favorite pen that we pick up, and it feels just right. And we don't want anybody to take it from us. So think about that with our kids. Sometimes they'll think they like one thing and they find out later, oh, this works much better for me. And then also to look at reducing postural fatigue of how our kids are sitting with some of these problems. All of us are not good desk chair learners, and we know that. And our kids need the chance to have a standing desk or to be able to lie down on the floor if that's appropriate, or a pacing area in the back of the room. It might be a big rocking chair, a giant beanbag chair, something that works. The butterfly chairs are kind of cool now too. So there's so many flexible seating options, and to realize it's okay to get up and move. You don't have to stay still. And this is just showing that one of our students with a big beanbag chair as an example. And the idea of a study carrel. I said, when I need to get a report done or to work on something for a family or a teacher, I need quiet. I go to my office. I love to be with everybody, and obviously we're talkers. That I need to concentrate. And for students to understand, it's okay to go to an area that's a resource area. It's okay to go to a study area or to a back table and turn myself away from the crowd. And to realize what works, because once the students start to make that connection of self-advocacy, that I know I need A, B, and C, and they can ask for it appropriately, that's powerful. There was a survey done with parents of students with autism, and as young adults, they said the things that were lacking the most was that my child had not been taught how to be their own self-advocate and time management skills. Again, time management, another executive functioning area of the brain. Okay. And that's my nephew Casey doing his homework, and he really likes his big stability ball when he's doing it. Okay? And I added this slide because I think so many times many of our kids, we think they know why I have to write. And lots of students love to write. And those who don't have some additional challenges as the kids that we are talking about today. But I think it's important to say that some of our kids, they don't understand, what is the purpose of this thing? I hate it. Why do you keep asking me to do it? And so if we can make that personal connection, it can make a humongous difference for them. So whether it's asking another class to come over to have a party, or it's trying to figure out how we can go on another field trip, whatever it is in junior high and high school that's going to be motivating for that individual or for that class, I've got a bigger buy-in, without a doubt. Whether I'm persuading the principal that we need some, another evening of entertainment on the Friday night at the high school, whatever it is, make that connection. I said my nephew Casey really wanted high-speed internet at home. And so his dad said, well, you know what, you're going to have to convince me, persuasive essay. So he wrote a persuasive essay to his dad about why he needed high-speed internet, and he typed it all. And he had probably 3 big, long paragraphs for a kid who writes this much. And he was amazing, and he did get high-speed internet, thank goodness, because we wanted it to work. So it was kind of cool to see. So just keep these things in mind as well. That's your
All
little
right,
friend there.
yes. I left this slide in, even though this was one of my third grade students, because it gives such a perfect picture of a student who hates to write and how it affects their school day. But this little student was in third grade, and he was one of my frequent flyers in the office behavior cubbies. And in the office behavior cubby, he had to write a response sheet on what he did to get in trouble. Okay? And he wrote on this day, not right. What did I do to earn a timeout? Not right, because it's my least favorite thing to do ever. And then because he was on the spectrum and very, very literal, he thought, oh, you know, there's something that I hate even more than writing. So he said that it's his second to least favorite thing to do ever. And if you look how long he's in there, he's in on that date from 2:08 p.m. in forever. Okay, I know he's a third grader and you guys are middle school and high school teachers, but think how this impacted this child's education. This little child was in the behavior cubbies in the office almost every day. Think about your students who are getting suspended because they refuse to work, because they show their refusal in a more aggressive, less acceptable way in a school. Think through some of your students that you fought those battles with and think, could any of that frustration have been related to a request to write their homework, to do their assignments, to sit in class and get productive? You know, words that we say. It's high stakes. All right, for kids who refuse to write, it almost always looks like behavior, like non-compliance. It may be because students have difficulty with imagination, creative thought, and language. One of our evidence-based practices in the world of autism is visual supports. Research, all kinds of research, shows that visual supports help students with autism, probably lots of other students, learn. One of the ways you can do this is use a picture. Pull a picture out of a textbook. Find a picture in the library or on Google Images that relates to what that student is supposed to write. Then sit down and talk through that picture with that student. Help them notice the details in that picture. Help them think through cause and effect using the picture, and then ask them to write. What you're doing is another research-based strategy called priming. Priming is getting the thoughts in a student's head and then having them do the task. This is a way to do that. And as I said earlier, this is not just a strategy to get a good grade on this assignment. If we can help students visualize things and then write about them, they're going to have a whole lot better chance writing on our high stakes I-STEP and in, of course, assessments, where they have to read a sentence, what they're supposed to write about, make a mental picture, and then write. If we can teach this skill, we're going to have better ability to accomplish that task. This is an iPad app. For those of you who come to our technology thing tomorrow, this is one I'll talk about more. But one of our Indiana state standards from 5th grade through high school is to use technology to prepare a presentation to present to your peers. I forget how it's worded, but it's sort of like that. For our reluctant writers, this is just like, it's like a death sentence. It's so difficult. This is an iPad app that essentially turns an iPad into a whiteboard. It's a wonderful strategy. If you want to know more about it, come up here after this strategy and I'll tell you more about it, or come to the technology thing tomorrow and I'll tell more. It's a good one. Okay, let's look to another writing challenge. Getting stuck. Perseverating. Writing about the same thing over and over and over. Writing in a laundry list of facts and having very difficult idea transitioning from one idea to another. If you have a student who has challenges in that area, remember all of these areas: language, organization, sensory, and motor, because you may want to provide strategies in all of those. Here's one that you could do if you had a student who was a reluctant writer and your assignment was write a report about photosynthesis. Fairly typical for middle school, high school, that's the type of thing. All right, our reluctant writers, many of them who get stuck and have trouble transitioning from idea to idea, will have trouble with that assignment. Your non-reluctant writers, that's a pretty easy one. If you have a student who struggles it, here's a strategy you might try. Take that picture that's in the book, that photosynthesis picture in the book. If you're teaching photosynthesis, there's going to be a picture like that. You, the teacher, put sticky numbers on the important areas on that picture. Any way you can do that. You can buy them at the Target or something like that, sticky numbers. And then verbally rehearse with that student. Sit down with that student and, where is number 1? Thank you. Sit down with that student and talk through this. Say, what is this picture about? This picture is about photosynthesis. What is photosynthesis? Have them give a definition. There's your topic sentence. Then you, the teacher, point to, tell me about this part. And they'll tell you something about the sun. Okay, go through the whole assignment as you point and they talk it through with them. Flesh out what they really truly don't know, but I think you'll usually be surprised. They have the information here. They just have a hard time organizing it to write it down. Let them keep this paper, and then they can continue to refer to it and write in that order, right from number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. Again, it's a strategy that after you do it a few times, they can internalize. So when they have to write, they can start noticing the details and remember the fact that there needs to be an organization system when they write. It's a really effective strategy. All right, perseveration, I mentioned that. A lot of our reluctant writers have trouble with transition words. I heard some ladies up in the front sharing joy before the presentation because one of their students back in their classroom wrote something with transition words. It's hard. It's hard for a lot of our reluctant writers at middle school and high school. I have a different strategy for elementary age students, but for the high school students who struggle with transitioning, I usually create what I call a sloppy copy. I take a piece of computer paper, typing paper, and I, the teacher, write these words in an order sort of like that. I tell the student, okay, I wrote some words here in random order. As you can see as educators, they're not random at all. Okay, they're in a logical, sequential order. And then I have the student verbally fill in the blank. In the beginning, they tell me something. First, okay, what this is doing is it is helping them establish a sequence to their ideas. After they've done this, then I say, okay, go to the computer. I want you to type this neat. Because one of the things that kind of gives them joy is this looks terrible. Okay? It looks terrible. So it's easy and kind of gratifying to go to the computer then and keyboard it. It's a win-win situation for teaching kids who struggle with transitions.
Okay. We have a lot of students, I don't think it's just with autism. I think it's kiddos who just really, really struggle with writing in general, that they become very perfectionistic. We have a lot of kids for various reasons. It doesn't look right the way we wanted it to on the paper. If they are doing pencil paper, it's looking yucky. That's not what I wanted to say. And then they're erasing and they're getting frustrated. We have other students who are on keyboards and typing and writing, and yet they'll hit the backspace button and everything is deleted, and you're just about like, oh no, let's click undo. Because all you had to do was tab over and erase 1 or 2 words, and they got a little carried away. So for whatever it is, and when that frustration happens, they finally got on a roll, but now you can just see they're starting to melt down a little bit. Stop. It's okay to have just a short break. And to look at, again, developmentally where your student is. If it's a student who's developmentally a little bit delayed, then what kind of strategy I'm going to use is going to be different than if I have a junior or senior in high school who is one of my kiddos who is diploma bound and, again, still hates to write. And so I'm going to look at, they've got to figure out what works for them. You can push yourself away from the table, whether you're rubbing your hands on your legs and giving a stretch. Remember, those muscles start to cramp. Give yourself a little arm stretch. Reach up high. Do whatever it takes without bothering anybody else, and give yourself a mental break. You might ask the student to try to learn to deep breathe. And I'm talking deep breathe for many reasons. But in this instance, I'm getting frustrated with writing. Again, remember that amygdala area of the brain does not like stress and anxiety. Learning will not happen, but it loves deep breathing. And it opens the gateways to learning again. So have the student to learn how to do some deep belly breathing. It's powerful. Doing a mindfulness activity with your whole class can just be stopping for a moment, closing your eyes, doing some deep breathing, and just thinking about your breathing visualizing something that is pleasant, doing a brain break activity with the whole class. All can be really wonderful. And I think we might do a brain break here in a minute. So I think if you keep those kind of ideas in mind, we might have lost 5 minutes of writing, or maybe, and it could only be a minute, but we weren't getting anywhere. We need to stop, recoup, and get started again. We can't teach kids during standardized testing to, hey, you look like you need a break. But I can teach you on an everyday occurrence when I'm with you how to self-regulate, how to help yourself to be calm, oriented, focused, and when you do need a break. So if I do it every day, they're going to pull it up during standardized testing if they're students who are taking it. Okay. The other thing we'll see is, again, that discomfort, that squeezing, the hard pressure, the yuck of the pencil paper tasks, and just wanting to throw the pencil and paper. And sometimes I've seen the ball of paper end up in the trash or on the floor many times. So we want to be able to help with that as well. If I have a student who is against using pencil paper, I'm going to make a deal. I'll write, you write. Let's take turns. You do the first sentence, I'll do the second one. You brainstorm for me, and I'm going to jot down all your ideas. I want you to get out that working memory as fast as you can, and then we can clean it up and we can do something with it. The strategies Kathy was talking about sooner. Again, I'm going to write it down and let them just go to town on all the knowledge we know is there. I'm not always going to write for them, but I'm going to make a deal, and I'm going to make it more and more confident. And if I've worked on these little chunk down pieces of writing, eventually all those pieces can be put together, and they're not going to need as much support. And so if I look at, for some of my students, it might be the physical component of writing, but it might be typing. And again, we know many of our kiddos, I would encourage, if you're not on keyboarding programs, our kids really need a good keyboarding program. They need it before they get to you. And many schools are doing it, but some still do not. To be able to give parents information to practice on the weekend with the kiddo, to make it a fun activity, they need keyboarding practice. But again, in this scenario, I'm going to take turns with the students, and I may let them just, again, go to town on whatever they want to say. I'll type it up, and they can clean it up. Perhaps I'll take turns, and I'll write the first couple of sentences, then I'll have them write a couple of sentences. And eventually, you know what? They start making bigger, longer sentences. They're finding out they feel successful, and they just don't need as much help as sometimes they even think that they do. Okay. When we look at technology, I'm huge with word prediction. How many of you use word prediction with your students? Okay. If you're not, I highly encourage you that it has so much power. If we look at our kids, again, with slow processing speed, with working memory problems, with motor problems, with spelling needs, with limited vocabulary, the power is endless. I can see word choices, I can hear word choices. If I'm a slow typer, or I can't hang on to something long enough to get it out here, I can click on the word when I see it. I don't have to type out the entire word. It is not a crutch. It is actually a tool that can help to facilitate writing. The also part that has speech to text and text to speech. I've had students who brainstorm and they just talk to the computer. Just get it all out, and again, then they can clean it up and make it their own. Not use everything that they said, but at least it's out there before they lost their thoughts of what they wanted to say. Kathy talked a little bit about the use of visuals earlier. That visual representation for a junior high or high school student, whatever it looks like, of a picture that represents something, whether they drew it, whether it was something on the internet, that they can click back over and look at that visual picture, or sitting right next to them. That's their working memory. That's something they can hang on to. You can look at a picture and get paragraphs out of it. If they draw something themselves, if you can, then the idea is they start to draw one thing, it spurs on a memory of something else, and they quickly draw another. It doesn't mean you spend 45 minutes drawing a picture, but again, it will truly help facilitate not only the idea of having more to say, but the organization of what they're saying as well. And so word prediction, text to speech and speech to text, when a student reads back what they have written, we know that that is research-based, that proofreading helps us to be better writers. Many of our students don't do that. But if I can have the power of a talking word processor, then I can sit back and just listen to what it was that I wrote. Or students can switch with each other and listen to what each other wrote. And I have had so many students that are so excited to say, here, put my headphones on. Do you want to hear what I just wrote? And they're just so excited to share and proud. Okay. SnapType is an app that is iPad-based, and it is free. And what SnapType does anybody use iPads in there? Okay. And if you have access to, and you have students who are doing any kind of worksheets that you do not have electronically, you take a picture with your iPad, it takes a picture of the worksheet, and then when you double tap where any place there was supposed to be a response, then the student can type on the screen. And then you can just email it to yourself, email it to wherever you need it to go to. A $1.99 version allows you to save files and you can print from, but the free version works super well. To me, it was a big plus because I had students who just, even for 3 or 4 word answers on a worksheet, it was hard for them to get it out. And so now we can also use, we'll talk about DocHub as an electronic conversion of PDF with the Chromebooks and so forth as well that does the same thing. Okay. Read and Write Gold. In our district, we went to Chromebooks. And so we are really strong in Read and Write Gold and all the Chrome apps. This is really powerful. It has wonderful word prediction. It has the ability to take vocabulary words and put them in a separate table with the definitions and pictures. I think our kids waste a lot of time on trying to find the definitions and get them written or typed up. If the goal of the task is that I'm supposed to learn and memorize these definitions, then let's get to what it's about. I can sit back and I can listen to it. I can reread it again if I need to, but I'm not going to spend as much time creating it as I am on what the actual purpose of the task is. And I would always say that with any writing task you're asking your students to do, what is the purpose of this? And then how can I most efficiently have my student to be the most successful they can be? And it also has speech to text and text to speech. This is another one that we'll talk about a little bit tomorrow too, the Ginger Keyboard app. It's just another nice word prediction program. It is $3.99 and it has some nice little extra features in it too, just to be aware of. Dragon Dictate has come a long way. It was that, talk to your computer with the program, and it's going to type everything you say. Google Chrome does a pretty darn good job, but this is out here. This is called 123, and Kathy and I will demonstrate it, and then you're going to stand for a minute and do it, okay?
I didn't know this was the one you were going to do. I wouldn't have reminded you.
I love this one.
I hate
and
this one.
And high school students, high school students will love this.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to say.
Kathy doesn't.
I'm going to say 1.
Oh, wait a minute. I think we got this from Paula Kluth a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So if she does it, give her the credit for this one.
Yeah. Okay. 1, 2, 3.
1,
2,
3.
1,
2,
3.
1,
2,
3.
Okay, you get the idea. And then I'll say freeze. Then we're going to go, the next phase will be, 1 is now going to become a clap, okay, with no talk.
2,
3, 2,
3, 2,
3, 2,
3.
Okay, you get the idea. And then I'll say freeze. And then we're going to say 1 is going to be, and then 2 is going to be, woo! Okay, here we go. Woo! 3. Woo!
3.
Woo! 3. Woo!
3.
I wish you guys could see her face. It's really cute. I can't do this. You're doing great. You're doing great. So that's the idea. So you're going to stand, have a partner. This is a brain break. Your brain goes off from what you're thinking about. You're going to increase your dopamine, which increases all the good stuff for learning. Okay? Okay, ready? Just start. Everybody got a partner? Hand up if you don't. Okay? All right, ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Okay, and freeze. I'm going to add just one more because you guys are so good at this. Okay, 1 was clap, 2 is woo, 3 is jump. Because we got to get movement, remember? I got to get my movement in. Ready, go. Okay, you guys are awesome. You can have a seat. It's great. And the great part is we just released your amygdala for more learning too. So remember that dopamine is that increase of laughter. And again, giving your brain a break and the movement. So you guys were awesome.
Think your students would like that? Exactly, and you'll be amazed at the difference in their attention to task after that. It just changed the chemistry of their brains. Okay, back to what we have here. This particular one, do you have any students who have trouble taking notes? Is, I think, still one of the Indiana standards. Aren't students required to take notes in class? Yeah, I see a bunch of heads. It's horrible for our kids who struggle with writing. They just don't do it. So sometimes we give them copies of class notes. Sometimes they take their own notes, but then they're illegible. So there are some apps that are starting on iPad apps that are starting in this world of handwriting recognition that recognize poor handwriting and change it into digital text. It's a wonderful breakthrough. This particular one is my favorite one, except for this month, they took it off the App Store. So if you come tomorrow or want to hear other ones, come talk to me afterwards and I'll tell you some of the other ones that aren't as good that are available right now for kids who have trouble with their handwriting being so illegible. Keep looking for this one if you have access to an iPad, because it's the best one around, making the best inroads into this handwriting recognition. And they took it off this month, so go figure. All right. Anybody have students who are reluctant writers that don't write down their assignments? I would assume that almost everybody in this room would hold up their hand. This is an iPad app. It's free. It is the best one around. If you have a student who doesn't write down his assignments and you have access to even one iPad, let that student write his assignments down on this and he can send them to his parents or himself at home. It's easy as pie. The assignments can be written in list form or on a calendar. It sends out push notices for when the assignments are due, when they're overdue. The parents can get them. It depends on how you set it up. It doesn't have to be a dedicated device for each kid. You can have one for a classroom. And it's a wonderful way to help kids who struggle with writing down their assignments. All right, let's move to another challenge that our reluctant writers have. Misunderstanding the directions. Have you ever given an assignment and thought that you really did a good job of explaining what the student was supposed to do, and then the kid spent a bunch of time on it and did completely the wrong thing? Okay, it's so frustrating for all of us, adults and students, but especially for the reluctant writers who hated doing it in the first place and then found out that they did the wrong thing. All right. Temple Grandin is a woman with autism. You know the name Temple Grandin. Okay, she's a woman with autism. She's 60-ish, something like that. She's brilliant. She's on the World Lecture Tour, and she has given us insight into what it's like to be a person with high intelligence who's on the autism spectrum. I've heard her speak many times, and the most important thing to me that she has said was that after 3 sentences of somebody doing what I'm doing, talking, lecturing and talking, after 3 sentences, she tunes me out because my words go into blah, 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 blah. That's the way she describes it. 3 sentences. She has a wonderfully high IQ, if you want to base things on IQ. She's a very intelligent, mature, articulate lady. 3 sentences. Think about our students who have executive function differences in our classes. How do we teach? How do we give assignments? We're verbal people. That's one of the reasons we went into education. Most of what we tell kids to do, we tell them verbally. Know that your students with executive function differences are not going to get a lot of that. They just aren't. What you need to do is write it down using as few words as possible. I'll have some examples in a minute. I used to do a lot of trainings with police officers, and they said that they had a lot of problems with false confessions. Because what would happen would be a person on the spectrum would be brought into the station because they happened to be in an area when there was an altercation. It happens with people on the spectrum. They often are in situations where something unfortunate is happening. They get taken into the police station. The police officer is doing what I'm doing right now. Lots of words, lots of talking. And they say, "Did you do it?" Almost 100% of the time the student will say yes. Because yes is the answer that usually makes adults happy. And more important than that, it usually makes the adult go away. I guarantee you, if you have a student in one of your classes on the spectrum tomorrow and you give assignments like I'm doing right now and you say, "Do you understand?" I'll give you $1,000 if that kid doesn't say yes. They will always say yes because it's the answer that's going to make me go away. It's going to make me happy. Okay. I promise you that's going to happen. This is a paper I've put up, again, above copy machines. And It's a simple one, but it's what we say and what they hear. When we say, do you understand? What we really mean is, do you understand what I just talked about? What the student with autism hears is, are you paying attention? Do you understand? Usually, oh, I'm not paying. More effective, tell me what I said using your own words. When we say, this is important to our class, most of our students know that what we mean is this is going to be on the test, right? If I say it like that, this is important. Our students with ASD don't get that hidden message because they have a hard time understanding or hearing hidden messages. They hear, this is important to my teacher, but not so much to me. More effective would be, write this down, it'll be on the test. Leave out all of the hidden language that we tend to do. At least I tend to do. I don't want to put things on you. If I say, are there any questions? At the end of this, I really mean, tell me what you don't understand or what you want more information on. The student with ASD hears the teacher's finished talking. At the end of this, if I say, do you have any questions? You're going to know it's time to stand up and go out the room, right? It's more so for our reluctant writers, our kids with executive function differences. More effective, tell me what I said using your own words. So just think this through and what we say as educators.
This is just talking about, and we have a lot of slides that I know we never can get to everything, so I want to go quickly a little bit. But looking at those kids with language processing, then when we look at what is a receptive language of receiving what I'm understanding of what you're telling me for whatever related disorder that may be coming from. And then we look at our kids who also have the attention focus, the sensory processing needs. And I can't get to your voice with all the other noises in the classroom. It's really tough for me to weed out what's going on out here in the hallway, down the hall sometimes, someone's pencil on paper, somebody else whispering to a peer. It might have just been the humming of the lights or the Duquesne overhead. Whatever that is, that I may have thought I had that student up front and center. But preferential seating is wonderful. I'll always recommend it under accommodations if I think it's needed. But we probably sometimes can have a third of our class in the front row. And I've got to be able to do more for that. You can just click the next one.
Sure.
And the next thing is just looking at how do I personalize those instructions. Again, visuals are an evidence-based effective practice. And so that we know that when we use evidence-based practices that we're going to get the most. So whether it's a visual cue card, it may just be able to say, ask the student that I need help. It may be tapping a little bit on his desk. It may have been the instructions chunked down in small pieces. I've given this example a million times, but I was so impressed with the teacher who did it, that it was a classroom that was, all the instructions were on the overhead screen. She'd written every single thing that they were supposed to do, very clearly marked. Everybody was able to go back when their short-term memory wasn't able to hang on long enough to those instructions. Some of our kids still needed personal, but it was all there. She didn't really do it for special needs students. She did it because she knew that high-stakes testing was demanding and saying that our kids need to learn how to read instructions themselves. So she didn't want to stand up there and talk to them too much, and she wanted them to read it. So it worked. It was a win-win. But we have to look at how we can be able to better provide that visual support. Sometimes we prompt too much with our words. We're too quick, and sometimes our kids are just getting ready to get started to do something, and then we re-say it again. But if we can look at how we can visually provide it for them, give them a resource to refer back to, it's going to make them more independent. And then again, depending on your student, how much visual support you need.
All right, knowing what to write. Our students who have good ideas, but when it's time to write, they cannot think of a single thing to say. All right, this is a really good strategy for middle school and high school. I'm sorry my slide sort of overlapped here, so I'll talk through what you're looking at. If you have a student who struggles with sequencing his ideas, this is the easiest, fastest, use it immediately strategy that I have. Sit down with that student, draw a line across the top of their paper, and then ask that student what they know about that topic. This one, for example, let's say the student's supposed to write a report about Martin Luther King. What do you know about Martin Luther King? He was involved in the civil rights movement. You, the adult, write your keywords, civil rights, someplace in the middle of the line. What else do you know about Martin Luther King? The student says, he was shot. He was shot in Memphis. You, the adult, write Memphis down at that end of the line. Ask him, what else? know about him. Okay, I'm not going to do the whole thing. You see what I'm doing here. Let me see. He was born in Atlanta, Georgia. You, the adult, write Atlanta down here. After he has told you everything he knows, then you, the adult, go back and put a number. This is the part you can't see, but there's a number under each one of these keywords. Then prime and rehearse. Have that student tell you his report. You point to number 1, he tells you, oh, Atlanta, he was born in Atlanta. You point to number 2, when he was born his name was Michael, but his dad didn't like it and changed it to Martin. Did you know that? I didn't either. Some kid with autism told me that, and I thought, he knew more about Martin Luther King than I ever hoped to know. Anyway, have the student do the whole thing, all of his ideas, and then have him write, starting with number 1. He'll end up with a report that is at least that many sentences long. It's painless. It's a wonderful, wonderful strategy.
So we're going to talk just for a moment about, you've heard me stress about we need to get our kids moving more. And here's the research is abundant. I just want to hit on the part that this is what movement can do for us. And it's really cool because our movement area is connected to our memory and our learning area. And so when we get our heart to target heart rate, I'm not just talking about, just standing up and changing different tables in stations in class, or they get a little movement walking down the hall. That's great. I'm talking about getting heart rate up to target heart rate and keeping it up there. Ideally, if we could do, 15 minutes would be wonderful. But if I can get 5 minutes, I'm excited for my teachers to do several times a day. It improves concentration, improves impulse control, attention, focus, memory, learning, decreases learned helplessness, even helps hormonally with females. The list is endless. In other words, everything that is bad goes down, and everything is positive is going up. It is like taking literally medication. And we sometimes are working harder than smarter. So if you can take 10 minutes before you start whatever task you're getting ready to do with your students and universal design and get what works for you and your students. I've had teachers who sometimes were the boot camp. Our older kids love boot camp stuff. They like competition. Every kid's moving within the classroom. You can do exercise and dance videos. There's an abundance of them. We've had some shared on our website. You can go ahead and go. So Dr. John Rady, I encourage you to listen to him. He is a psychiatrist from Harvard. He's done a wonderful book, Spark, and several others. He talks across the world about the reason why this is so powerful. He calls it, compared to a little bit of Ritalin and a little bit of Prozac, is when we get our heart rate up to target heart rate. He saw it with his colleagues that were fuzzy. They weren't able to focus in their own practices, their memory. The connection was they had had injuries, sports injuries, and could not run anymore. He did studies on Naperville High School in Illinois. If you look up that site, it will show you the only thing they changed was PE became no one standing around. Everybody had heart monitors on. They all got target heart rate. They all moved the entire PE times. They paired it prior to reading, math, writing times. Standardized test scores went up. So he calls it miracle grow for the brain. And this is just showing you, we've talked a lot about executive functioning. It is a powerful, this is the CEO of your brain. Can't say enough about it. And all of the areas that this is impacting when you get your heart rate up through exercise. These are the studies I won't spend a lot of time on, but it's just showing you that when they paired it prior to standardized testing, test scores went up. The composite here, this was a group of 20 sixth grade students on the left who were sitting quietly at their desk. They went out and just took a 20-minute walk. They came back prior to their math test and the brain activity that was going on and the difference that it made. And then again, this is just talking about some more studies. I have a lot if you want more. If you need to go back to your administration and say, we got to do more of this. How can I do this? Help me. I'll give you the here's why. And then it's just saying that there's all kinds of ways to do, from brain breaks to boot camps to exercise. And I want you to go ahead and do the research. Okay. The only thing I want to say on the writing legibly, I left that in there for my older kids. I'm telling you, at kids in junior high and high school, I'm going to do technology. I'm not going to spend a lot of pencil paper time. I'm going to technology, whatever that looks like for that student. However, when I look at my life skills population and different functional small amount of pencil paper writing, then I want to make sure that you look at, there's lots of strategies that we can help those students. I'm not expecting them to do a lot of pencil paper. I'm going to put them on technology as well. Okay, good, Kath.
There's some stuff that I think would be valuable to you guys. It's on the handout, so pull that up if you want to. I wanted to show you this. Editing. Editing is another one of our Indiana state standards, and it is just a hated task for so many of our reluctant writers. If you have a student who hates to write, and editing is one of the standards that you're addressing, use whatever editing checklist you have. This one's mine. Feel free to take a picture of it and use this one. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter which one you use. The thing that does matter is chunk the tasks. Only have the student do one thing at a time for the whole paper. So, for example, if you happen to use my editing checklist, cover everything up except for number 1. Have the student check their entire paper for capital letters. And then mark that one out. They're done with that. Move to number 2. Have them check the entire paper for punctuation. After they've done that, get rid of that one. Cover it up. You see what I'm doing here? What happens so often with our middle school and high school kids is we hand them the editing checklist and say, make sure you check your work for all of these things. Do they do a good job of that? No, they usually do a terrible job of that. If you chunk it and have them do the entire paper, one task at a time, you'll be amazed at how much better they do. I'm going to jump through here. This is another strategy. If I were using this, when I use this at middle school and high school, I take off the pictures. You want it to be as age appropriate as possible. This comes from the world of autism. And we've found through research that students do much better if they know exactly what they're supposed to do, exactly how much they're supposed to do, and what they're supposed to do when they're done. My most effective way of using this is I go into a classroom with a fistful of these on half sheets of paper. And when I have a reluctant writer here, I write down, oh, you're supposed to write a paragraph about littering. I write the word littering. I write 6 sentences. I write as little as possible. And then I write, put in the teacher's basket. Because how often do our kids' papers end up stuffed in the back of their locker or their folder and they never turn it in? And I put that on the table right in front of this student. When the student has finished that assignment, they can throw that paper away. Now, a lot of teachers write this on their chalkboard, and that's good. But a lot of our kids with executive function challenges have trouble tracking from the board to their paper. So even though it's up there and the teacher has put something like this on the board, they don't do it. All right, the last thing I wanted to show you is writing a report. There's some good stuff in here. Look at that. Yeah, I know. I hate skipping this stuff. Look at the handouts because there's some things for high school that I think you would like. But anyway, writing a research paper is just a horrible task for our reluctant writers. At the end of this handout is a template. Feel free to use the template, copy it, use it in any way, but customize it for your own student. Okay? Take off the pictures if it's not age appropriate. The importance about this template is you take that packet of tasks that kids have to do when they write a research paper and break it into chunks. Only give your reluctant writer one chunk at a time. They have to do one task with a due date for that one chunk. They turn that in, and you give them the next chunk. For example, this one would be choose a topic. Give them a paper like this one. Write down the possible topics. You write their due date. They turn that in. Give them this next one. If they have to write a thesis statement, that's really hard. Make it as simple as possible. Do one chunk at a time. They turn it in. You'll be amazed at how much better work you get from your reluctant writers. The rest of this is about 10 pages long, something like that. It's on the handout.
Thank you all.
Okay,
you guys
thank
have
you
been
for
an
telling us
awesome
that.
audience. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you.